Hello, everyone. Goodroy here, and this is my money brief. Yep, on today's money brief, I want to talk about inflation. We just received the latest inflation numbers for the month of November. And as some of us expected, inflation numbers did tick up, and it looks like we're going to end the year, well, at least based on when the next time we're going to see inflation numbers at above 34%, closer to maybe 35%. I think what we've seen for the year is inflation rate at 34.6%. Yep, 34.6%. That is the highest, I think, in about 26 years, 2020. I think the last time I saw anything this high was in 1996. So that's a long time ago. So inflation rates at 34.6%, higher than the 33.9% we recorded in the month of October. Now, kind of looks like we're back to above 34%. The last time we were at 34% plus was in June when we recorded the inflation rate of 34.2%. If you recall, what had then happened was we started to see inflation numbers go down to like 33-ish levels. And then I think looks like maybe things were beginning to trend downwards until the fuel price adjustment that happened in the third quarter of the year. And that has now led to the spike that we're seeing. And so basically expected that you would see inflation numbers tick up, as some of us have said. And I think this is likely going to remain for a couple of months before maybe it starts to trend downwards again due to base effects. But if it doesn't, if there are any more price increases or adjustments, then you could really see these inflation numbers really look sticky. Now, what is interesting is just a cross section of inflation numbers across the country, across various sub sectors or sub indexes that the MBS typically captures, and I can see imported food inflation at about 42.3%. That's just astonishing. Imported food inflation, of course, is inflation that we import from other countries because of increase in prices in those countries as well. So for the countries that we import a lot of our food items for, food inflation has also gone up. So perhaps explaining why importation or foreign goods or foreign food products are very expensive now, so at 42.3%. And so food inflation generally is 39.9%, the highest of the major indexes. Now, the inflation numbers that I like to also look at is what is called core inflation. So core inflation essentially strips out the volatile part of inflation, and that is printing at 27.9%. Or if you even want to remove the more volatile energy, you're looking at maybe 28.7%. So these are pretty high numbers, and that's the sort of number that you want to use if you're projecting, if you're maybe an accountant somewhere or someone who's doing an analysis or trying to project into next year. You always want to look at your core inflation, and that's really what matters to businesses, and kind of strip out and volatile food and maybe energy prices. But inflation numbers pretty high for the year so far. Been a very tough year for Nigerians in terms of prices. I don't know how we're able to cope. No other country would you see prices go up this much and people still being able to manage, and go on. And then we're seeing a lot of spending this December already. So who knows? Suspect perhaps inflation numbers are likely going to remain pretty high again. And so other sectors as well did show high inflation. Housing, water, electricity, gas inflation numbers there were like 29% as well, while transportation inflation was 30.5%. So what does this all mean in general? Well, with this sort of numbers, expect the next NPR, which is like to be in February, to continue to be hawkish. It might not be as hawkish as it's been towards most of this year, but I think that inflation numbers would likely still be as high. NPR numbers will likely still be at that 27, around that 27.5%ish. They might leave it flat when they meet in February, depending on what the economy looks like. But I think it's going to be pretty high. Expect your interest rate to continue to be high because of the sort of inflation numbers. And then my big worry is also FX. There's something called inflation differential. That is difference between inflation in your country and inflation in another country that your currency is benchmarked against. So if the inflation rate if that gap is widening, then that could impact on the exchange rate. But I do recall just last week, the United States also saw a slight spike in their inflation numbers. So maybe there might not be that much difference in terms of inflation differential as it affects exchange rate. But the wider the inflation numbers or the higher the inflation numbers, the more difficult it is for policy makers to better project. The government is projecting 15% or so inflation rate next year. I don't see how that happens with these sort of numbers at 34.6%. It's going to take a miracle for us to achieve those sort of inflation numbers. I mean, imagine that, in fact, for this to happen, maybe, crude oil prices would have to crash drastically. And we don't even want that to happen anyway, because that also affects government revenue and could even hit our GDP numbers even worse. So, now, with inflation numbers this high, it just means that we all have to be very careful with the sort of things that we buy, because when you're in a high inflationary environment where things are very expensive, you tend to see a lot of fake and adulterated products and materials. And so you want to be very careful, because people now start to cut corners just so that they can meet up with their projections or with their pricing, and somebody else just bears the cost of that and pays a huge price for it. So you want to be very careful now that inflation numbers are still this high. 34.6%, like I said, is the highest that we've seen. In fact, if I decide to look at these numbers, the last time we saw inflation like this, I think was in 1996, right? Yeah, I think around March or so, 96. It was at 41.9%. Now, interesting thing is that it kind of dropped to 12.8% the next month, which was April 1996. But of course, I mean, that data, no one knows whether you can take those data seriously, because the last person that was in charge of the country at that time was Abacha, right? I think it was Abacha that was in charge around 96. I hope I'm correct. Anyway, that is Money Brief for today, and that's me trying to explain latest inflation figures and what it means for you. So as you party hard this dirty December, you want to save for next year. Again, like I always say, better to spend now and save later. So if there are expenses that you need to make later in the year, but you have the money for it now and you can hedge it, you better make that spending now and don't wait till later. January is probably going to be rough for a lot of people, as it always is. It's usually the longest month in the year, and don't expect prices to come down anytime soon with this sort of numbers that we're seeing. That is my Money Brief for today. Look forward to doing this again very soon. Until then, do have a profitable week ahead. Bye.